Hello again. However often those who are opposed to the concept of scientific racism declare the success of their ideology and prove, at least to their own satisfaction, that science has ruled out any possibility of inherent differences between ethnic groups, along comes a piece of evidence which indicates that the opposing view to their own is still breathing. Scientific racism not only refuses to die, but appears today to be in better health than it was before people like Franz Boas launched their crusade in the 1930s with the intention of putting an end to it once and for all. It must all be very disappointing for those subscribing to the equalitarian dogma. The problem is a simple one. All the things suggested by the opponents of scientific racism over the last century or so have now become part of mainstream life. In the United States, segregation has been dismantled and access to all types of education, from nursery to university, are as open to black people as they are white. According to all progressive thinkers and activists, such a state of affairs should have ushered in a utopia of equal achievement by black and white. Since all differences were social and cultural, once all children had equal opportunities, then all would make similar academic progress, provided, of course, that they all receive the same kind of education. Britain has never had a segregated educational system, but there too the theory held that all that was necessary was to ensure that the publicly funded schools which black children and white attended were of the same quality, and then, as surely as night follows day, the same number of black students would be getting to medical school, training to be quantity surveyors, qualifying as lawyers, and so on. It was all so simple, except, of course, that it was not. Despite the provision of equal educational opportunities, the most academic universities stubbornly remain the province of white students, and a large proportion from Chinese or Indian families. The black school pupils were unable to gain the necessary qualifications to gain admission to the medical schools and best universities. That's the situation both in Britain and the United States. In the same way, once civil rights laws in the United States and the Race Relations Act in Britain had been placed on the statute books, then racial prejudice in employment would also come to an end. When this happened, then of course black people would soon be seen taking up posts in the professions which were dominated by white people. The problem was that they did not, and as the years turned into decades, it became apparent that racial prejudice alone was not a good and sufficient explanation for the divisions along racial lines which were observed. Clearly, other causes were at play and would have to be dealt with before black people could enjoy equal success. Before the dawning of that happy day, though, it would be necessary for some temporary measures to be put in place to help things along. It is an unfortunate but undeniable fact that some of those remedies looked to the unbiased bystander like a return to the way things had been in the past. I've spoken here of the return of quotas as a means of bringing about racially balanced student bodies at the best American universities, so that it might at least look as though black people were doing as well academically as whites and those whose families were of East Asian origin. Seeing quotas for ethnic minorities was for many a retrograde step, but it was not nearly as bad as another of the ideas mooted by, among others, critical race theorists. This was the idea of the return of segregated education, against which so many people fought so vigorously in the years following the end of the Second World War. It is almost beyond belief that black people themselves should wish for a return to separate schools for black children and white, but there it is. Richard Delgado, one of the founders of critical race theory, is an enthusiastic proponent of such an idea. He thinks that segregation for children along ethnic lines at schools, it would be a good thing. These measures are advocated on the grounds that black pupils, boys in particular, do not thrive in the school system and appear not to do as well academically as their fellow white pupils. Suggested explanations include racism on the part of teachers and a lack of strong black role models. The about turn from opposing to supporting segregation has been largely unremarked upon, but it is of great significance. To an outsider, it looks as though all the assurances of those who adhere to the equalitarian doctrine have been proved mistaken. For many years, such people claimed that as soon as racial prejudice in education and the workplace was removed, then everybody's outcomes would, as a matter of course, become similar. This has not happened. The explanations which are brought forward to account for the obvious fact that black surgeons are nowhere near as common as white surgeons, and Asian shopkeepers a good deal more common than black ones, often seem a little strained. The average citizen may not have any hostile attitude towards ethnic minorities, but he or she has almost certainly noticed that black scientists and inventors are rare, while black athletes and footballers are seen routinely. This cannot help but shape their perceptions, perhaps subconsciously, and incline them towards the view that black people are better at physical activities rather than those which require high levels of intellectual ability. This may well be infuriating for progressive types, but it shows how the old racial stereotypes have never really gone away. There are two important points we need to remind ourselves about at this point. The first of these is that it must always be emphasised that there is all the difference in the world between being racially prejudiced, on the one hand, and on the other simply acknowledging that it is very likely the case that black people and white are born different, and that as they grow to maturity these differences tend to become more pronounced. Racial prejudice, in the sense of a system which denies opportunities to black people in any area of human life, is abhorrent. Accepting that differing ethnicities have individual weaknesses and strengths, though, will not by itself lead to unfavourable outcomes for anybody. The second point which must be borne in mind is that almost all the latest research in genetics, anthropology, archaeology, biology and education seems to support the idea of scientific racism. This is a bitter blow for those who suppose themselves to be anti-racist, but it is a risk one takes when following an ideology in matters relating to science, instead of keeping up to date with the science. Many of the more opinionated people in the anti-racist movement like to present themselves as scientifically minded and forward-looking people, trying to defeat an outdated theory which has by a long margin passed its sell-by date. This is not at all how matters really stand. No ideology or theory which conflicts with the available evidence can, in the long term, survive, let alone flourish. Ideology cannot dictate the nature of the world, nor can it alter reality. From time to time in history, movements have emerged which claim that their own way of looking at the world is the only true and correct one. When scientific discoveries are made which cast doubt upon this worldview, they are ignored or suppressed. This is how some Christians reacted to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, of course. In the long term, all such enterprises are in vain. It may be that those who cling to the equalitarian dogma find themselves in the same position. If so, then they are on the wrong side of history. It's too soon to be definite about it, but it's beginning to look as though the days of equalitarianism may be drawing to a close. In such a case, it's high time that consideration was given to what will or should replace it. In short, what happens now and how can new discoveries be reconciled with old ideas?